straight into that subject, joining me in studio to talk about whether or not this summit will in fact yield some results or whether it will be merely just another talk shop. COSATU General Secretary Bekinja Busisi Wemavuso from the Business Leadership South Africa and Head of the Center for Development and Enterprise, Bernstein, all join me in studio now. Thank you all for your time tonight. Perhaps let's begin with what Devon closed off there with, that part of this meeting is supposed to include all stakeholders. The fact that it is being hosted out of the NEDLAC forum, let's talk about inclusion and exclusion. What are the limitations in terms of who actually gets to contribute and who doesn't? Mtate Beki, I'll start with you.
For us, we have asked for a job summit in NEDLAC before President Cyril Ramaphosa was elected as the president of this country. We got Section 77. An agreement was reached that we need to convene a job summit. We understand the current job summit is a presidential one. Mainly it's up to the president as who he invites to deal with those issues. But as we know that any other issue that can be agreed in NEDLAC will not be enforced because there's no mechanism to translate whatever agreed to policy formulation. So it has to be a kind of agreeing in broad terms, but have to take to NEDLAC to produce policies that can be transformed or transported to the cabinet, to the parliament. So to us is a question that we're looking for, putting some suggestion, but as who is being invited, there are many people invited by the president. We don't even have the list.
And is that a limitation at all, or are things perfectly fine the way that they are?
Look, South Africa is divided into a country with insiders and outsiders. Insiders are people like me and you who have jobs. But we have millions and millions of people, nearly 10 million now, who want to work but who cannot find a job. And the unemployed are not represented in NEDLAC forums. I don't know who's coming tomorrow. I haven't seen the list. And so it's the unemployed and their voices and the communities where they live, so small sort of towns, cities, metros, but also small businesses. They're underrepresented. So I am concerned whether we will hear the voice of the outsiders, and more important, will their interests be taken into consideration in the outcomes from the job summit tomorrow and the next day.
And of course, part of the fear of others, we had on Zwelinzima Mavavi last night of SAFTU, and one of their concerns was the fact that then part of the conversation lends itself to being business as usual, especially when you look at who perhaps may not be able to attend that forum. As Business Leadership South Africa, are you confident that, in fact, whatever comes out of there will be fully representative of the concerns of the majority of South Africans?
We actually are, very much so. And the reason for that is that, remember, this has been a very consultative process. Now, leading to tomorrow and Friday has been consultation of more than 4 or 5 months, I stand corrected, of all the NEDLAC parties, which is labor, government, business, and civil society. So in terms of the issue that Anne is raising, in as far as the unemployed being represented, I would argue that the civil society organizations, because as you and I know, they represent broad range of stakeholders. There are those that are for gender, there are those that are for youth unemployment, and so forth and so forth. So I'm of the view that what we're going to be seeing tomorrow is therefore a culmination of the voices of all those which are impacted in the South African economy, which is basically all of us.
Let's listen to what Zwelinzima Mavavi had to say yesterday, particularly on this point of inclusion.
We, on the last minute, are being called, come on, come guys, we want an inclusive job summit, come and add numbers, come and beautify this job summit, and to give a pretense that you have participated in the process of shaping up the product. And we're refusing to be used in that fashion.
So clearly it hasn't been as inclusive as you suggested.
So I have sympathy for Mr. Vavi.
Yeah.
We were part of we went to one of the big consultative processes, and this was not the most encouraging sign, frankly. And we know people who were denied access to that because they wanted to raise some very fundamental issues about the labour market. So for me, I am looking at the Job Summit, and I hope that they will come out with a new growth path for South Africa, signals of a new development and growth path that isn't business as usual, because business as usual has got us the deepest unemployment rate in the world. And if we keep doing what we've always been doing, and the interests, the key interests around the table are big labor, big business, and national government, I don't think you're going to hear the voices of the outsiders who are not part of this conversation and whose interests are not being represented as fully as they should be.
All right.
So
very briefly,
actually, my view is that labor was represented. So labor has to organize themselves. Is it COSATU? Is it SAFTU? Is it business was represented? We have to organize ourselves. Is it BUSA? Is it BLSA? Is it minerals? So Vavi cannot cry foul because for whatever reason, he was not part of the labor constituency, because we have invited all the stakeholders to say, come, let's have this discussion. So in terms of who represented labor, but we cannot sit here and say labor was not represented. It was represented. It might not have been SAFTU and they may not like it, but the fact
But does the fact that they're the biggest union in manufacturing and they haven't had a voice not count? But I really want us to move on and get to the other issues now. COSATU itself has raised concerns about whether or not the summit will be successful, Begin Jalinjali. What are your concerns right now?
Our concern is, I think it might be threefold, in the sense that the work that has started about 3 months ago has not been getting the attention of the seniority of the senior people that can be able to take decision as we move it on, both in terms of businesses as well as in terms of government. Prior, 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting convened by the president where we saw the captain of industry, with due respect, all of them in the country that are available, coming to that kind of a meeting, be able to indicate what they can be able to do in order to take and advance the country forward. When you look to government, it was supposed to be led by ministers and DJs, but it has been degenerated to some junior official who could not take decisions.
One expert earlier in the week said that COSATU actually is just simply playing politics, that the officials that are there to take whatever concerns you have no reason to not believe that they will not be taking it back to their political heads.
It's time. I mean, if you get 4 days a week for people to be able to engage, and every time you have to engage and people have to... We know how long it takes from government to get a mandate. It has to go from the DDG to the DDG to the... It takes a long time. If you take what we did in 2008, which was in the same kind of an arrangement, which we agreed from the beginning of the Job Summit, that let's replicate what we did in 2008. It was at the minister's level, it was at the captain of industry level, and we're able to take quicker decision. Of course, we did not implement them, which was one of the bad things that we don't want to see happening in this round. But that was one of our concerns in dealing with. Second is that there has been no eagerness to deal with the policies in terms of this round of negotiation. People have been talking about reprioritization. The question of injection of the money that goes in there is very likely, in our view, in terms of dealing with those issues, the stimulus. But there's good things out of it. One of them is that I think everybody agree now that we are in a crisis. It's not the challenges, as the Deputy President once said, no, it's not crisis. We're in a crisis. When over about 10 million people are unemployed, is a crisis. The fact that everybody says we're in a crisis, to us, it says there's a change of minds in thinking in terms of what we need to do. There are too many issues that are on the table in terms of the project that they have to be. There's no narrow focusing. In our views, that we need to take fewer and be able to implement and be able to assess. Of course, in dealing with the time frames, the phases, as we call it, is a positive step.
So basically the work has to be more targeted. And one of the criticisms that you've in fact leveled is how government is increasingly resorting to populist, as you put it, and fiscally unsustainable policies. What do you mean by that?
Look, I think the big issue is the growth rate, because we're not going to get jobs unless we get investment, much faster growth, and then jobs flow from that. So what I was talking about in that article was that we see the president as being caught between two very difficult situations. On the one hand, There's the populism of the ANC, which is we can spend money in all sorts of directions, fee-free tertiary education, an uncosted NHI plan, and a number of other things, budget-busting wage deal with public sector workers. On the other hand, there's the economic reality. And the economic reality is we've run out of money and we are in deep, deep crisis. I absolutely agree on many, many fronts. Now, what South Africa has to do is to change direction. We've got to turn the dial on unemployment. And that requires much faster growth. And it requires fixing our fiscal situation, which is very severe. And it requires turning our economy in a more labor-intensive direction.
Does changing that direction then also speak to policies such as the National Development Plan and some of the projections that have put out of there? Because that has been mostly the framework, at least that government points to as the foundation for the path that we're on.
Well, we were told this week that in a leaked document that the National Development Plan no longer believes that the country can meet the National Development Plan goals. And I just want to emphasize the scale of what we're talking about. If you're a young person today, over the last decade, the number of young people has grown by 500 people per day. The number of jobs has decreased by 100 per day. So the youth population has grown by 2 million in the last 10 years, but we have 400,000 fewer jobs for that part of the workforce. And so the key message, I think, the key issue we'll be looking for from the Job Summit is we don't think projects and initiatives are going to crack it. They're often very good projects and they help 10, 20, 30,000 people. But what South Africa's got to signal is that we're starting to make some structural changes to make this a much more labor-intensive economy that grows much faster. We're a very uncompetitive place in which to do business, and we discourage firms from hiring particularly young, inexperienced workers.
Okay, we're going to come back to the structural changes that you would want to see, especially where the economy is concerned. But let's talk about business. One of the things that some analysts have been talking about is the issue of an investment strike by those who have capital in their hands. Is that your view as business, that perhaps even some of your very own members are withdrawing the extent to which they could be incentivizing and investing in the South African economy?
You know, in times of economic uncertainty like this, of course, everyone plays a wait-and-see game. But is there an investment strike by business? Of course not. And I think BLSA has gone to a great length and effort in terms of producing a report last year, which actually debunked that myth, to say that the skyline of Sandton, as you see it, the construction happening in Midrand, and the construction that is mainly happening in the country today is one that is driven by business. So I think if we're saying there is an investment strike, I think there's going to have to be clarity in terms of what is it that we're talking about. Is there a wait-and-see game because there is uncertainty? Of course there is. But are we holding our cash and saying we are not doing anything? Of course that is not true. And I think we have sufficiently dealt with that, you know, and produced figures and facts to that effect.
Do you agree?
No. We had a meeting with BLSA leadership. They told us in our face that because of uncertainty, they are going to hold money. They're not going to invest. So when they come the following day, and then you got through the spokesperson and said, no, we're not on investment strike. Who do you believe? We have to believe the captain of the industry. We meet with the CEOs and they say, there's a problem here, there's uncertainty. We're prepared to invest in Australia, even where the returns are lower than here. These are South African people doing these things. Sasol is investing somewhere, I think it's in the US, billions and billions of rand. They're not investing here in the country. Business is refusing to add value in terms of the value chain kind of stuff. And there have been some evidence. It depends who you have to believe it.
Were they specific about why? Were they specific about why they're not?
Political uncertainty. I mean, that was an argument before Cyril came into this. To this thing. if there has to be a new thinking, which I think there is a little bit of new thinking when we meet the CEOs and said, President, we trust you. We are dealing with corruption. We get more comfortable now to deal with it. It's a change of thing, but you can't deny. Business can't speak on both sides and say there's no investment strike, there's an investment strike, the uncertainty. They should just be saying we're investing as normal or we're not investing. And they can't take a middle ground. There is an investment strike, or to an extent that there's a kind of not to invest to the degree that they need to do it. I think they are looking to the risk that they have.
So basically part of the international investment drive should actually also begin at home, if what I'm hearing is correct.
Exactly.
And I'm going to give you a moment now to respond. And you're speaking about these structural changes that need to take place within the economy in order for something like a job summit to in fact be worthwhile and have results. What are those changes?
Well, we have to... South Africa has to both recognize the crisis that we're in terms of both growth and jobs, and look at why we're in this situation. I don't think there is an investment strike. In fact, I disagree with the whole concept. The concept of an investment strike assumed that a whole lot of businesses get together and collectively say we're going on strike. This is the wrong image altogether. As we know, there are many different kinds of businesses, from big to small, but also in different sectors of the economy. And each company has an investment committee who say, are we going to invest here or are we going to invest there? What are the returns? What's the certainty? So I think that what's happened is we have just swamped businesses with too much regulation, and then they end up making choices that make sense to them and their shareholders as to where to invest. And if property rights are under question, you're not going to invest here. If there's a whole lot of other uncertainties and the country is not competitive, so our logistics are not competitive with a whole lot of other countries, you're going to invest elsewhere. But the notion of a collective strike makes no sense whatsoever. So that's the one point I want to make. The other point is we've had a strategy, a growth path, you could call it, which said very explicitly, we want to have a high skills, high wage economy. And the idea was you would get so much growth going and employment, we'd somehow pull the unemployed with us. Well, the results of that strategy over the last 15 years have been failure. And so the structural change we're talking about is to recognize that failure and say we have to do what countries all over the world have done, which is go for low-skill manufacturing jobs and other labor-intensive jobs that might not initially pay a lot of money, but it gets people who have absolutely nothing, no hope of a job whatsoever, it gets them into the economy with a job, and they can progress from there. And we've seen this in every other country, but South Africa says, no, we're different. And we're saying that's failed. We have to look at a different road.
But what do then policies like the minimum wage throw into that basket? Because then on the other end, you'll have businesses who say, well, actually, we want high labor-intensive work, but it's just too expensive as a result of minimum wage.
Well, there's one employer that isn't paying the national minimum wage or isn't going to, and that's the government. The expanded public works program pays something like 80 Rand a day, 11 Rand an hour. And we're saying that should be the absolute floor. And the minimum wage is now a fait accompli, which big business signed on to. We think there should be more exemptions to the national minimum wage, and we need to look at ways in which we're going to encourage lower skill, lower wage employment.
Right.
But otherwise, we're going to just keep growing unemployment every single day.
All right. I see Becky's shaking his head. I'll get to you in a moment because Busisiwe is burning in her chair. Yes.
Absolutely. Please allow me to repeat myself. Is business treading carefully because of political and policy uncertainty? Certainly. Is there investment strike? No. Because if there is an investment strike, then who's developing the skyline of Sandton? And I can tell you as much, it certainly is not government.
Firstly, let me just indicate, when the president was going overseas, everybody was advising the president, even the international rating agencies, they were saying people in South Africa are not investing, businesses And how on earth you hope some foreign people will invest in your country when your own people are not investing in countries? Whether you put it uncertainty, whether you put whatever you put it on and you put together and said, putting all those together indicate to me and to the directors where to invest. If the conclusion is that we are not investing in South Africa, we are going to be investing somewhere else. That's what we term in the trade union language is an investment strike, because you are taking a decision, you are not going to invest here. You might be investing somewhere else. That is a different issue from us. For us, if you are not investing in the country in which you are, and that whatever you produce, you can't satisfy the domestic market, is called investment strike. So we may differ in terms of terminology. In terms of the NDP is looking for low skills, low economy. It's not looking for high skills. It's not in the NDP, the kind of thing. When you do that, then the question of the demand, who's going to buy your product if people are not unable to buy those particular? That's a debate that we need to engage and look at it and say, but also the question of the national minimum wage, we should not use a scare tactic. There's no national minimum wage as yet. But there's no investment in dealing with those issues, even where it exists in terms of settlement determination. And I mean, there's no enforcement by the Department of Labor. So let's not speak for people who are finding ways of not investing and said this is just a fear mongering of some sort.
Okay,
there is exemption in the processes of the of the framework that we're going to talk about. So we can't use something when it allows some kind of exemption.
Sure. Let me come to you and also include your concluding remarks in that statement.
Absolutely.
As well.
I think to ensure that we steer this economy in the direction that we'd like to see, it warrants that all parties come to the party. And I think in as far as Mr. Njalinjali is concerned, I think we'd have to implore Labour as well to ensure that they contribute to an environment that is conducive for foreign direct investment to come into the country, because we know that Labour is actually not making it easy. So it's one thing to be pointing fingers at government and business. As Labour, they are going to have to say, what is our role and how are we helping the situation? And I can tell you now, to a large extent, Labour is not. And in as far as the Job Summit is concerned, that is coming up, we are looking forward to the process. We have actually confirmed and as business that we're actually going to be signing a 30-day strict payment code to small suppliers to ensure that there isn't issues in as far as ensuring that small businesses and entrepreneurs, are concerned. We have also said as businesses, and it's going to be announced tomorrow by Proudly SA, that there's going to be local production that big business is going to be committing to going forward to ensure that this Job Summit indeed is a reality.
And your concluding remarks, two big things that need to happen for this summit to actually be a success in your eyes?
I'm looking for signals that the country is turning to deal with the scale of the unemployment challenge. That's one. I think I'm pleased to hear about what business is going to do in terms of paying small businesses. I certainly think we're losing small businesses. The numbers are going down. We should certainly look at exempting them from a whole lot of regulations and considering exempting them from the national minimum wage, as well as new firms. So small firms and new firms. And I think we have to make it much easier for companies to hire young people at the wages that are appropriate for young, inexperienced workers. So we're looking for change in those directions. We would have liked, but it was rejected, we would have liked the country to have adopted an export processing zone in Nelson Mandela Bay at Kruger, where we experiment with trying to get some of the low-skill manufacturing jobs that are leaving China, where conditions and wages have now improved so much that factories want to move out of there. Ethiopia has managed to attract some. Madagascar as well. We think South Africa should give this a shot.
All right.
But that would be an example of trying to think differently.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. And you have the last say, very briefly, sir.
I think we need new views in terms of what we need to do. I agree that we need to do things differently. The 30 days, for an example, is a long outstanding issue. What will change business now, big businesses in that case, to pay the small businesses within the 30 days? So that is just a repeat of what we know. Government is killing the small businesses in terms of payment. Big business is killing the small business. So they must not promise old things in a new bottle. It's the old wine in a new bottle. What we're looking for is a commitment, take out the greed, and be able to work for everybody.
All right. Thank you all for coming on to Newsnight tonight for this very fascinating and really enlightening discussion.